Hello and welcome to another edition of the MeG podcast. This one is yet another one that was been slightly delayed from our initial plan, which is just one of those things. But it does mean that the running order has possibly changed a little. However, just to remind people, we have the usual people here: myself, Nick, and Matt Haywood, and Richard Jeffrey Cook. Welcome along, guys.
Hello.
Great to be here.
So thank you as ever for joining in on this. Now, when we first talked about doing another podcast, it was just before the Ribble Rumpus competition, which was entitled Euphrates to the Yangtze. So it's basically an Easternish competition. And this prompted Richard to say, how about I do a bit of a thing on the role of rivers in battles? Now, we've moved on some weeks since that competition, but it seems silly not to use what Richard was thinking about on that. So we're going to start with that as a sort of historical. Who knows? Maybe get people thinking about things, and maybe especially relevant to refight type battles. I don't know. We'll see what Richard says about this. And after that, since the Ribble competition, there's been another couple of competitions here in the UK. We had the Havoc on the Hamble and the Campaign Teams competition. So what we thought we'd do is, because we haven't looked at competition stuff for a while, so the idea is we'll have a look at some of maybe the more unusual, more fringe troop types that were used by some people in those competitions, and just have a think about and discuss about how we might use them, how we thought they were used, and how we think they fit into armies. So again, it's I think this is one of these let's see where we end up competitions. And so I don't forget, this is much to remind myself, Matt has also suggested that as part of this, he would like to just do a quick update on some of the more recent Kickstarters and the like in the world of 3D printing, since this seems becoming an ever larger part of the hobby, and more people are getting into it or accessing friends to get stuff to print for them, and things like that. So we hope that will be of interest to people. Anyway, we've now reached the point in the podcast where, as ever, I say it's time for me to shut up, hand over to Richard to take us through the role of rivers in battles. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Nick. So this topic came about, as Nick said, from the title of a competition, and just got me started thinking about the possible roles of rivers in both campaigns and battles. So I'll start off with some of the impacts of rivers in battles. I suppose the first thing you might think about is the use of a river as a defensive obstacle. And I think one of the more spectacular examples of this is probably the use by Ptolemy of branches of the River Nile to actually stall and then defeat he didn't defeat really the army of Perdiccas, essentially by stalling the army of Perdiccas on the boundary of Egypt. This so fed up some of the commanders under Perdiccas that they ended up assassinating him. Seleucus was one of the generals involved in this. So this was perhaps a spectacular case of the impact of a river in preventing an army being defeated.
Whole thesis there, Richard, the use of rivers in assassinations.
Yes.
Yeah, it was pretty spectacular one, that for sure.
So yes, the Nile obviously being one of the more significant rivers that you could come across. But I mean, there are plenty of other examples. I mean, one of the other problems with rivers was actually getting an army across them intact. And the Battle of the Crimmisus, which took place in 339 BC, And as I'm sure you all know, this was where the Timoleon, yeah, the Greek tyrant of Syracuse ambushes a much larger Carthaginian army whilst it is crossing the river. It was a misty day that day, and whether through skill or luck, make your own mind up, Timoleon basically catches the Carthaginian army whilst it's crossing the river, and the Carthaginian army is never really able to deploy properly, and the Greek army routs the first line of Carthaginians, and basically the whole Carthaginian army panics. And the one thing you can guarantee about a river is if you're panicking to try and get back across it, the casualties are going to be enormously high. Rivers or even streams and a panicking army is not a good mix. Just ask Edward the First at Bannockburn, for example. Another famous example where an army gets defeated and pushed back across. This case of calling it a river might be generous, but it has the effect. And you can go on through history. Battle of Towton, I suppose, is in the Wars of the Roses, is another example where a lot of bodies end up drowning while trying to cross the river. So there's that aspect to the river. Rivers themselves, however, could also be useful in protecting a flank. So there are plenty of examples where that occurs. Just an example would be the Romans using, I think, the flank Magnesia in 189, although that doesn't appear to have worked particularly well, since the troops on that side were actually then run down by the Seleucid Catafracts, and there's a possibility that was because the Seleucid Cataphracts were able to work their way around the edge of the Romans, because they weren't, the river bank wasn't a sort of nice straight line as we like to pretend they are in our wargaming tables.
Oh, surely we're totally accurate in that.
Quite. So there's that aspect to rivers, and then there's the sort of defending a river crossing, which just to look at three examples that all involved Alexander the Great. First being the Battle of Granicus, where the Persians seem to have deployed with their cavalry looking to defend the riverbank and prevent the Macedonians crossing. That's an interesting one because they do appear to defend the bank rather than, another common tactic was actually to stand a bit back from the bank and then try and basically counterattack and throw your opponent across the river. So let them cross, disorder themselves, and then attack to get you back. But this obviously doesn't work for the Persians, probably because the Macedonians are a bit too good and a bit too determined, and they're led by a nutter in the case of Alexander the Great. So the +2 for the legendary general claim obviously works in that case. The Persians don't seem to have done any better at Issus, where again the Macedonian army crosses. Now, in both of these cases, it doesn't appear that the rivers provided too much of an obstacle. And it's worth bearing in mind when you're talking about Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, and a lot of Asia, rivers do tend to dry up in the summer, so they become more sort of river beds rather than actual sort of significant bodies of water. So this has the effect of perhaps not making them as severe an obstacle as they might be otherwise. But yes, we can see a sort of range of battles, and this occurs throughout. I mean, one of the most notable places where rivers were used in a defensive mode was perhaps in southern China, where the Yangtze is particularly used and combined with forts and river fleets, provides a very formidable obstacle. And in fact, most often the southern China is conquered by coming down the river. So taking the territory further to the west and then moving eastwards down the river. Not only that, rivers themselves obviously play a much wider part in campaigns as well. Not only do they provide an obstacle, but they also can be taken advantage in other ways as well. It's worth noting that a river barge potentially can carry cargoes of up to 100 tons, which is about 10 times the amount you could transport by ox cart. Now, transport upstream was actually slower than travelling by road, but in terms of sort of economic cost, it's reckoned to be about 5 to 6 times cheaper. So significant. Downstream is even better because it can be up to 8 times faster than travelling by road. That's the effect of the current, and 11 times cheaper. But this obviously depends on the nature of the road. Of the river, right? And I mean, obviously, rivers can have significant rapids and waterfalls, and these obviously obstruct navigation, and then you're dependent on portage to get round them. And river basins are not also naturally connected, maybe to ports that actually lead are based at the sea. It varies sort of enormously, but the logistics of that are quite significant. And one of the ones that's always fascinated me is actually Caesar's conquest of Gaul, because there is a suggestion that the logistics that Caesar was operating, particularly after the initial campaigns, were very dependent on transporting reinforcements and materials up the Rhone and Saône river system, so they could link in to the Roman network. And a lot of Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, he's operating at the end of a very long supply chain. It's still a matter of debate amongst historians, because it's widely believed the Roman road network in Gaul wasn't actually formalized until 39 or 38 BC. So some 10 years after the supposed conquest of Gaul, I suppose we describe it. But I would argue that that road network actually had much of its origins during Caesar's conquest of Gaul. The other thing we do know is that the Gauls did actually transport goods by river even prior to the Roman invasion. What the Romans do seem to have done is actually improved the river transportation by introducing canals and controlling the water flow to some extent. Because one of the big problems with rivers is that they can be a significant source of flooding, which would obviously could knock out any sort of river transportation. I mean, it's really only in the 20th century that schemes have come along to control river flooding, and prior to that time, flooding of river valleys was a constant and significant threat. I mean, you only actually have to look at things like the Severn Valley to this day, and it's still a major area of flooding, even with all the control measures that are in place. Another thing to bear in mind is actually that river systems are actually often a source of population density. And when you're looking at logistics for armies, actually, if you take an army of 20,000, then it's reckoned that you need a density of at least a population density, this is of at least 20 to 25 people per square mile to actually provide enough sustenance and agriculture to sustain the army. Now, just to take an example, in Italy, the reckoned ancient population density varied enormously from sort of upland regions, for example, in Umbria, where it could be as little as 10 people per square mile, through to the sort of Campanian plains and the other Roman ager, as they refer to them, the sort of public lands that were heavily agricultural, and they would support perhaps up to about 110 people per square mile. So you've got a very significant range. But this population density actually also is why we see generally an upper limit on the size of armies in the ancient period, and that armies probably could not exceed 80,000 just because of this population density issue that you have in supplying armies. Because thing with ox carts and even mules is that if you're transporting goods any distance, there comes a point where the mules can't forage enough, or they're starting to eat the supplies they're actually carrying, and that you very rapidly reach a situation where the mules can't supply an army if it's too far away from your stockpiles of food. So this is why ships and indeed navigable rivers were a significant had a significant impact on this.
Is that also, when you eat the mules?
Yeah, ultimately, yes. This is why trying to cross plains like, I suppose, Crassus's invasion of Parthia, that comes to a disastrous end at the Battle of Carrhae, is such a problem. I mean, it's also very significant the reason the Romans actually created river fleets for defending both the Rhine and the Danube, because of the importance of transporting goods and supplies along that river line. And in fact, it's reckoned that in the late 4th, early 5th century, part of the collapse of the Roman defences along the Rhine is maybe due to the lack of provision and obtaining grain from Britain. So yeah, river supply was very significant. It also, of course, has an impact on siege warfare. on occasions. The actual process of diverting a river could be used as a tactic to force a town to, if you can dry up the water supply, you can force a town to surrender, or the reverse. By diverting a river through a town, you can actually flood it out and make conditions so bad that a town might surrender. So these are all other reasons for rivers having an impact on campaigns of warfare. So that's just a few thoughts on the impact of rivers.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of logistics side of it's very important. It did make me smile when he talked about diverting a river to flood a city. So you think, why did I suddenly think of the Ensign Isengard at that point?
Okay, not a historical source,
not a historical one, but it's almost if you want to see what it looks like, get back to your Lord of the Rings. Phil, I've got one question, Alexander related question. You mentioned that 3 of his battles involve rivers,
and the third one being Hydaspes.
Indeed, I just wondered, I think we, perhaps instinctively or because it's fairly common, you sort of think of rivers being used defensively, like the Persians did at Granikos and Issos. But in a way, could you argue that at Hydaspes, that Alexander sort of utilized the river in a sort of offensive way in engineering the battle, or am I overthinking this and trying to be over clever?
Overthinking that one.
Yeah.
I would argue. I mean, he sends the cavalry force upstream to find a crossing point, and they then engage with the Indian chariots and cavalry that Porus sends to try and stop them. Due supposedly to the muddy conditions, the Macedonians have forced that turning the crossing there, and that enables Alexander to move the rest of the army, or at least part of the rest of the army, across the Hydaspes and then engage in the critical battle.
I think I was really thinking so that the lead up to that, Richard, because if I remember rightly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the army, Porus on one side and Alexander on the other side of the river, they were there for a reasonable time before, and Alexander sort of lulled Porus into a sense of routine, which I think happens in other cases in other parts of the world, but Hydaspes is the one that springs to mind.
Okay.
You just get routine, sort of Porus thinking river's quite high, we see the Macedonians getting up in the morning, doing whatever their routines are, and so on.
Yeah, but I would argue that Porus wasn't. I think it was the turning of the river and that enabled Alexander to force the crossing. I'm not sure Porus was particularly caught out by Alexander. I would say Ilipa was, for example, a much more obvious battle where Scipio does the same thing for several days in a row and then completely catches Hasdrubal, is it?
The Carthaginian commanders, they all begin with H, and there's about 5 different names.
They all begin with HA, don't they?
Yeah, there's only 5 names across the whole. Hanno.
It's only Mago that's different. Anyway, yes, so he catches out the Carthaginians that way. But that one doesn't involve a river particularly. But yes, I mean, rivers also as a water supply, the amount of water an army needs to drink each day, particularly in a hot or dry climate, is incredibly huge, which is why, ironically, most desert battles were actually fought by a river.
Oh, does that mean if we're in desert terrain, we should always have a river?
Probably. Well, whether it's at the edge of the table or it's nearby, I
Yeah,
suppose,
I suppose that's
is the case. But yeah, you wouldn't move a significant army through a desert without a substantial water supply.
Yeah.
As Alexander, for example, found his cost in Carmania.
He did, and I'm just thinking of when Khalid ibn al-Walid transferred troops from Iraq to Syria during the Arab conquests. That was considered a very significant feat, and he didn't actually transfer that many. It wasn't an army; it was like a unit's worth, and because they used camels. They got a load of camels to drink their fill, allegedly sewed up their mouths, and then as they were crossing the desert, every now and then would slaughter one to drink the stored water.
Yeah.
It was quite and even then the whole thing was a bit touch and go at one point. So yeah, I think crossing deserts, obviously, state the obvious, water is phenomenally important.
Yeah, particularly if you haven't got a force either entirely mounted on camels or, and in fact, cavalry were regarded by the Arabs as a status symbol just purely because of the amount of water they required.
Yes. Yeah, slightly impractical, but I can afford to actually have horses. Yeah. Does the thing of games in terms of do you think that rivers are probably essentially suited to scenario type games?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of a sort of standard competition game, the problem with a river is it almost can create a non-battle if you make the defensive aspect of the river too strong. In that, if the river is separating the forces, then there's no incentive to cross the river. So it is more in unbalanced and scenario games that rivers have a role. Last year, for example, I was playing in Simon Stokes's Pacto campaign and was having to force a river crossing. And I sent a flanking march around to try and outflank my opponent who was defending the riverbank. Unfortunately, that flanking force got defeated. And I lost the battle mainly because I lost the flanking force. So that didn't quite work out the way I intended. But there you go.
Yeah. Well, as you say, that was sort of a campaign thing. It's
yes. So, but it was a good example where you had a river in a scenario situation that was as a result of the campaign.
Yeah. Matt, any thoughts on rivers and games or anything about rivers and warfare?
Well, I think there's also the aspect of controlling the actual crossings, because I mean, you've got, is it Constantine and his bridge?
Oh, the Milvian Bridge.
Yeah, and other aspects. I mean, you've got the more heroic earlier Roman examples, but I mean, weren't the Brits holding the River Tame at one point against Claudius's boys?
Well, there's Battle of the Medway, of course.
That may be the one I'm thinking
of. Where the Roman auxiliary, actually, the Batavians, are used to force the crossing and end up outflanking the British forces. You also have plenty of Saxon battles. A lot of early Anglo-Saxon battles seem to be fought at rivers. Possibly because they were boundaries between kingdoms, possibly because they were convenient meeting points for battles that were sort of almost pre-arranged. It's one of the suggestions. And then you've got the Battle of Stamford Bridge, of course, which, as one American historian claimed, took place not far from London.
Well, in Texan terms, it probably was.
Well, yes, except he thought it was about 13 miles from London. which yes, was a bit of a shame. But that, of course, is where a Viking army was sort of ambushed by Harold, or technically Viking and rebel army, I suppose, because it included Earl Tostig, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, just thinking back to your the Saxon battening at rivers, just reminded me, the Hereford just derives from Hereford, doesn't it? The ford of the army.
You could well be right. I know.
That's
interesting. I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah. Here, sort of German for the army. I'm sure somebody told me that at some point. I am no good with languages, and also bet Rich is now Googling it. Anyway, but it would sort of just reinforce maybe the importance of, it is a ford big enough for an army to cross. And there was an encounter at a river crossing shortly before the Battle of Cressy as well, wasn't there?
Well, yes, and river crossings actually were crucial to the Agincourt campaign, because the English were trying to get back to Calais, and there were only limited crossings that they could choose.
It is, and actually, probably all through history we're going to find this, because I was just thinking the lead up to the Battle of Tewkesbury and the Wars of the Roses was partly dictated by crossings of the River Severn. Is it?
Indeed.
Was it Margaret wanted to cross the river at Gloucester, but the city was close to her, and so she had to go further upstream?
I believe that's correct. Yes.
Obviously, but with all the on top of all the logistics stuff, the crossing of the rivers, very important. So there you are.
You don't get many bridges in sort of pre-medieval times.
No.
Romans possibly being an exception, and various other civilizations. But
and I suppose
by and large, most rivers you relied on fords or ferries.
Yeah.
And obviously ferries can only transport a limited number of troops.
Sort of going further back, isn't there an Amazonian mural or carving that shows Assyrian troops crossing a river using inflatable?
Oh yes, there is. It'll be from
the
Nineveh
inflatable goat skins. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, crossing rivers is definitely a big thing. Just the other thing about bridges, Richard, I suppose from you saying, the tendency for rivers to flood regularly. That's a good way to get rid of a bridge.
Indeed.
Yeah, and I've got a feeling that some of the big cities on either or both of the Tigris and the Euphrates quite often had boat bridges rather than permanent stone bridges, possibly partly due to the sheer size of the rivers.
I mean, that may be because of the engineering challenges in trying to create footings for the bridge. But yes, it could also be from a practical point of view that if the river was in flood, you can replace a boat bridge far easier.
Probably also easier to cut if you're being attacked.
Almost definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, bringing your own boats to create bridges across rivers is another big logistical item.
Which I think Caligula proved, didn't he, when he crossed the bay of whatever it was? Didn't he have a massive pontoon bridge made so he could cross over the bay?
I believe so, yes.
Possibly.
Quoting all your classical sources this one, aren't we?
This Caligula, he was bound to have done something fairly grandiose and probably very expensive.
Well, usually a lot of people end up dying when you're around Caligula.
Indeed. Okay, Richard, thank you very much for that. That's interesting stuff. Makes you think about the importance of these things. These things that are really quite different from the modern world, because we zip around on roads or even fly. The importance of rivers just in the world at the time, and that must be, I hadn't really thought about it. That's where a lot of population is going to be, that population density part of it. Because I suppose compared to the modern world, an awful lot of the ancient medieval world, the landscape would be empty in terms of people, or relatively empty. Like you talk about the Highlands with 10 people per square mile. That's not a lot of people.
Well, if you can't create a regular water supply, you're not going to live there permanently. A lot of nomads migrated to follow river patterns, and when rain fell, they would move away from the rivers to take opportunity to graze the fresh grass. But then, as it got drier, they moved closer and closer to the river as being the only source of fresh pasture. So if you were fighting nomads, one of the things to figure out was where they were going to be at any particular time of the year. And that could be imposed by the pattern of rainfall.
Blimey, warfare can be complicated.
It can be, indeed.
Glad I'm not involved in it. So, okay, well, again, thanks very much for that. I don't know if you got any final thoughts on that, Matt?
Not on the overall topic, but I think MeG handles big waterways quite well. It's quite a simple. It can have a profound effect on the game, but it's not too profound. As Richard said, it's not diagonally across the table or whatever. So you're not separating the sides, but you are allowing some manipulation of the fighting space.
Yeah. So yeah, no, that's right. It's good. Okay, right. So our next bit would be those competition armies, or the slightly unusual or completely unusual troop types used over these last few competitions. Maybe we can ask you to start, Matt, possibly because you've used some.
Yes, fair enough. This is my year of the elephant, as it happens. I tend to pick a theme or something for a year and then try and work out how to use that particular troop type or whatever. So this year is elephants. And they're interesting beasts in literal and gaming terms. Where to start? Right, okay. There's one basic flavour of elephant, and that's big grey, and it's got shove. Oh, sorry, off brown grey, just in case I just start a painting pink, cause a painting dispute. Mine are browny grey; they're covered in dust.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? They tend to end up covered whatever the local dust colour is.
Yes, exactly.
But when I've seen Indian elephants in Cambodia, they are definitely not grey; they are pink.
Yeah, no, it's a fair comment, and yes, I think something's so ingrained in the wargaming psyche that if it's not grey, it's not an elephant.
Yes.
Rather than reality, it's a bit like
all my elephants are grey.
Yeah. German grey Tiger II tanks come to mind, but as a similar example of where things went horribly wrong in history. So elephants.
So you just. I'm just now thinking, does this mean we have to paint all our elephants in approved felt brow?
try camouflage scheme, I think would be the correct way to go. But,
oh no. Okay, I'm sorry. I've just had that thought.
Yeah.
I'll let you go back to the more sensible topic of elephants in our games.
So in MeG terms, you've got your basic elephant. There are a few varieties out there. You can have superior elephants. You can have elephants that shoot. You can have elephants that shoot and are superior. You can also have ones with bolt shooters on them if you're feeling particularly. I'm not sure what the word to describe is different. But they fundamentally all serve as big, nasty anti-cavalry, anti-chariot, anti-battle wagons. They themselves don't like artillery. And then you get around to the mechanics of them. They have shatter, always. They have shove, including against barricades. In fact, I think the shatter also counts against the barricades. Shield wall does nothing, unsurprisingly, against them. And whether you're unprotected or in fully armor, it doesn't matter. They're just going to stomp on you. So very powerful, very expensive. They have limited. The important thing they always throw a white for their morale, regardless of their criteria. The only exception is when another elephant unit routes, and then they're throwing a green, because you go up one when your friendly elephants are out. And trust me, throwing a red on average troops is deeply painful. So anyway, sorry. Yes. So there are different thoughts on how you should use elephants. You have the let's take 12 of them and see what damage they can do. That hurts, but it can also go horribly wrong. Then you can have the mid-range Indian elephant, like camels, classical Indians, Gupta, where you can have only 8 or 6 if you want. The general principle I found to using elephants is they are the nastiest support troops you can have in the game. You don't necessarily want to lead with them, because that means they get shot at. They'll get whittled down. They're a sod to maneuver because they're tribal. So they're there to stop cavalry getting involved in anything you don't want them to get involved with. So you're supporting infantry, or your archers in the case of classicals, where you've got the javelin and the archer combos, or the later ones which I've been using, which have got a lot of blades, so just melee expert foot. They work well. As I said, they are quite vulnerable in various ways because they're only at most in 4s. So if you think about a unit of 4 cavalry, would you really use that as an offensive weapon? Unless in very specific circumstances. It's not something you're going to lead with blocks of 4 cavalry, because they will get shot at. Now, you say, well, all right, you take some shooting. But even on blacks, you will see those wounds start appearing. And when you get into combat, same principle. If your opponent's only throwing a white, doesn't matter. If he's throwing 4 of them against a unit of 4 elephants, that's what, 2 wounds? So you're going to get whittled down quite quickly. So they're a support troop in the sense that you wish to damage your opponent before they get involved. And also they just, to be fair, I've had some games with Nix where I've had elephants just stood doing nothing, but they're stopping him from coming around me. So they're a deeply interesting troop type. They take some finesse to use. Roger Whittam, for example, in his was it his Aman army? I can't remember, Nick. Can you remember which one he was running at Ribble?
At Ribble, it was the Anam, yes.
Anam.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, well, you know me, I can't pronounce anything that's in English, and even then I've got problems. He had an interesting approach in that he used small blocks of 2 elephants behind his lines. The theory was that you crash into his front line of infantry and archers or crossbowmen. And anything that broke through ended up getting hit by the elephants. The theory being that by the time you've broken through fairly large units of infantry, large tugs of infantry, you were quite weakened. And even 2 elephants, there's not much difference between 2 and 3 elephants, to be perfectly honest, in terms of casualties and breaking. They would be enough to really mess up your day. Slight problem with that is, of course, you're kind of relying on either your infantry winning or not enough of them dying that the elephants can have enough time to break the enemy army. Or no. Bolt shooting elephants, as I said, slightly different. They have the interesting effect as they're bolt shooters, they can actually shoot over units in front of them, so they can be very well protected. I think some have downgraded them to poor simply because they can almost never get into combat, but it's a very expensive bolt shooting platform if you even at poor. You've used them a few times, haven't you, Nick?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't like downgrading them.
No, I know you don't.
People who've done it are pretty much committing them to standing behind something and shooting overhead with them, because the armies that can have them can only have 3. Although actually, I think you could end up with 2 lots with an ally. I think if you say something like an Angkor Empire with a Cham ally, I think you can end up with 2 lots because you get 1 in the ally as well. But as they're poor, as you just said, they get shot up. And if you're turning white dice into green dice on a unit that's maximum size of 3, that's why I think they got an advantage over if they were just artillery, just bolt shooters, in that they move better because because they've got a 4 base width move. They don't only move on reds. so they are, but it's always struck me as a real waste making them poor, because they're still elephants.
Yes.
with all the stompy goodness that comes with elephants. Now, the bolt shooter ones don't have shove, but as you pointed out, all elephants get shatter. And especially if you run them into some cavalry, it doesn't really matter. And they're fantastic elephant hunters of their own as well, because the artillery gets an upgrade against elephants. I've only used them with the overhead shooting if the fighting area of the battlefield has been a bit constrained, so you might as well, or by putting them behind a unit of archers just to increase the amount of shooting you get on a given frontage.
Okay.
Say put a 6 base unit of archers in front of the 3 base unit of elephants with bolt shooters, and you can have three dice from the archers and 3 dice from the bolt shooters. And of course the bolt shooters actually shoot further, so you get some shooting in to begin with. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't like the idea of downgrading the report.
Fair enough.
And certainly not just use them as shooting overhead.
Yeah, they become very expensive then, don't they? So what they give you.
Yeah, I think so.
The only thing I will say, if you ever want a really exciting game, get 2 blocks of elephants on each side and fight it out. You're all on greens, and it gets brutal. 4 or 3 men, 4 or 3 base tugs, and it's very interesting. The one anecdote I have to share is where Sid managed to break 3 of my elephant blocks in a turn, causing red cabs on most of the army that was near the elephants, and it actually destroyed the army in a turn. Because he managed to, don't ask me how he done it, it's Sid. He managed to flank my elephants with an elephant unit. It was a genius move, and he just went straight down the line and took out 3 blocks of elephants, and my army commander died when he got hit by an elephant. And so it was immediate test for the army commander dying. But, and the rest of the army just went, no, I'm not having this, and left. So anyway, but elephants, they're
okay, a good question for you, since I know you've used, and I know we've discussed it. This is the benefit of the listeners. Superior elephants. Why do they always seem to die really, really quickly? Well, sorry, that's a classic mine always die, yours don't sort of thing, isn't it? It was in your army die. I suppose the ultimate question is, are they worth it? They cost a hell of a lot more. I mean, it's about 100 points.
Yes, 100 points more. I have had games where they have been the ultimate killer of everything that's in front of them, and they've won me the game. And I've had more games where they've just died to the black wounds of death from the dice. They just crumple. I have to say, the only time I definitely would take superior is in a themed event where I know what I'm likely to be facing. Otherwise, yes, it's a 400 point, because that's the other thing. I always use elephants in 4s simply because it gives me a frontage of 3 with a spare, and I find that much more efficient than 3s or 2s in terms of how long they last, unless they're fighting other elephants, and then that's just whatever the dice throw at you. A 4 block of elephant, if I take them as average instead of serious, saves me 400 points, which is not a small thing.
Okay, just on the superior one, just because Roger Pitfield, using a Thai Kingdom army campaign, had 12 superior elephants in 6 tugs each of 2 bases.
Oh wow!
Which I thought was interesting. One, it's a hell of a lot of points. So it's 320 odd at each. But the twos, that's. I did destroy one. It charged some cavalry of mine who rolled 3 wounds on 3 white dice.
See, wounded there.
Bye. That's a lot of points gone up. That's nearly 1,000 points gone. 6,000 points for those elephants. Is that a good use of superior, Richard?
I'm whether it's a good or bad use, I mean, it's an alternative choice. If it works well, it works. If it doesn't, it's an expensive failure, isn't it? So
well, I have to say, having 12 bases of superior elephants dumped in front of you is quite intimidating.
oh,
Until you start,
absolutely.
just in its sheer number. And then you start thinking about if I can pull them apart a bit and gang up some shooting, it could go horribly west for the elephants. So, but one we hadn't mentioned actually, Matt, is armored elephants, fully armored elephants.
Ghaznavid and Muslim Indian, I think, are the ones that can take the most
yes,
of those.
They can have those, and the Muslim Indian sultanates can even add unskilled firearm to them.
It's not worth it almost just to run that one. But,
is it just for the sheer comedy value? I'm sure it's actually a terrible choice. But it's negligible cost. But the reason I suspect it's not a good choice is it means they're then missile focused.
Yeah.
So you can never get into free charge range.
Now, if I could take fully armored elephants instead of superior elephants, I would do that. I would genuinely prefer to do it that way, because one of the
about the same cost, aren't they?
They are, but I think one of the problems. No, it's not it's the shooting. If you can avoid shooting with your elephants, you're fine. Otherwise, they just. This is one of the things that happened in the recent game with Sid. He just put a wound on each of my elephants before they got in contact with his elephants, and that was enough to break them. Because the casualties that built up during the melee and the charge phase was enough that if they didn't have that wound, I'd still be there and could have bought some of it back, and that's the other important thing with elephants. Always try to have your generals nearby with a yellow or a red card to remove the wounds that you get, because the longevity is massive by doing it that way. But but sometimes games don't let you do that, and elephants, great troop type, never a boring game with an elephant.
Richard, your experience with elephants? Any tips, wisdom, or is it one of those, they're just too erratic for me?
Have good dice is my main tip for
I'd agree
using
with that.
elephants. I mean, it's not ancient warfare if you can't have the possibility of elephants in my book. That's one of the main reasons I like ancient warfare. I've had mixed success, both fighting them and fighting with them. But they're good fun.
Yeah.
On a final note, I would say there are some armies out there that actually use are not your traditional elephant armies. So Sassanid, Persian, various of the successor state armies, and I think even a Roman army can take them with an ally. Or did that get removed?
That got removed.
But the mid-Republican Roman can have a 2-base unit of elephants, as supplied by Numidians probably in the 2nd century BCE.
So that and Chola Empire means you can actually have professional generals with elephants. That's quite a interesting mix.
Yeah, well, the Angkor Empire has professional generals, and quite a lot of drilled troops as well. So that does help you move your elephants around. I've got one last thought. Not elephants per se, but the Elephant King's list special rule. Is that just a way of getting your generals killed quickly? we talked about generals being a bit elephants potentially being a bit flaky. But a general you can throw in, adding 1 to an elephant that got high factors, they can do shatter, and then the elephant unit explodes and your general takes a test to die.
That was why I introduced them to the army lists.
Oh, I think it's fantastic, but I mean, I've used it.
I mean, good luck if you want to do it regularly.
I did last weekend in that little get together we had when I was playing Lance. It's quite good fun if you roll a skull. Because you've upgraded the colour.
I do it quite regularly with this crop of army lists for this year. I have both my elephant commands being led by mediocre generals, and they just get thrown in. And if they die, they die. And because even then, if the elephant unit hasn't been killed,
Yes.
It hasn't been destroyed. They're only taking a white cab for losing the general.
That's true.
So again, they don't. Oh, he's fallen off. Okay, whatever. So I mean, I'd never put the army commander in that situation, because the last thing I need is one of those. Because then they are going up a colour. But it's good fun, and as Richard said, you kind of have to clench and hope you get good dice.
Yeah, I think as well, just from what you were saying, and I think I probably agree with it, is that in a lot of cases you're probably wanting to see the elephants as support troops, not the thing you spearhead your attack with.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because once your opponent's engaged some of his cavalry or whatever, it's very hard for him to get out of the way once he's committed. And or you can stall them out just by putting the elephants nearly. So
there is the cut off.
there is I will say I've found there's quite a bit of finesse to use elephants. They're not an easy troop type to get your head round, particularly in some armies where you've got a very wide range of troop types.
Yeah. I certainly think I found a certain case of, if you're not sure whether you should make a particular move you're considering with elephants, there's probably a reason, and probably best not to do it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Cool. Okay, well, that's elephants. Pick another subject, Matt, and we'll get Richard to talk about it first.
Well, as he put the rule in, let's talk about shower shooting. Say that fast. Go on, I dare you.
Shower shooting.
Okay, yeah. Well, I use them. But we'll get Richard's thoughts first.
So the idea behind shower shooting is that some cavalry actually seem to engage in some sort of volley fire with the aim of putting enough density of fire against the opponent to sort of stop them while being mounted. So as opposed to the probably more normal shooting tactic for mounted troops, which is basically to have groups ride up towards the enemy, start shooting multiple arrows, and then wheel around and head back to the main body of the cavalry force. So that's the sort of idea behind it. It was probably more a trial than a full-blown, have we uncovered every army that might potentially use this characteristic. I would argue, for example, the Mamluks in the Mamluk Egyptians probably would be a candidate for shower shooting as well, because they definitely seem to have shot in more volleys than the Mongols, for example, that they faced at Ain Jalut, for example. But that's shower shooting. Is it a points effective option? Probably not. It's a different way about thinking how you use your cavalry shooters. Over to Nick.
Yeah, well, I did use some shower shooters at the Ribble Rumpus. I took Shionbi Kingdom's army, the former Yan. They had 2 6-based tugs of shower shooting cavalry, and they're quite interesting because they're tribal close, superior protected, experienced bow shower shooters. And with the combination of being close and the shower shooting, it does mean they can't skirmish. They can never run away or evade. Now, if I remember rightly, for shower shooting, if you're loose and shower shoot, you can still run away, but you can't skirmish. And that becomes applicable in Sassanid armies. The Sassanid one in the Sassanid and later Sassanid in the Byzantine PDF, if I recall correctly. Although the Middle Sassanid in the Persia, Iran, Iraq book, they can have shower shooters, but they're also close formation and Catafracts style. So there's a variety of shower shooters out there. I found the former Yan ones they're actually quite useful and that's partly because but mainly it could be mainly because they're superior. And also one feature of shower shooting is if you shoot at people who are charging you, they don't get the normal plus claim for cavalry who've shot in the charge phase. So effectively, they're effectively fighting the same as superior short spear would. And because they're superior, they're not too bad. I found them often mostly used against infantry rather than cavalry. You can plonk them in front of infantry, non-shooting infantry, and shoot at them. And if you get it right, you're sort of forcing them to charge you. And because infantry tend to have a 3 base width move, you've got more chance of your shower shooting slows, because they do better slows, actually giving you a chance to do more on the way in. So the downside is for those Formian ones, they're tribal close, so they maneuver like bricks, and they can't skirmish or run away. So once you've got them into position, they're a bit committed to that. You can obviously, they can still fall back, but being tribal, that's a red. Although they do fall back 3, so it does make them a little bit. It is a certain amount, because we played at Ribble, didn't we, Matt?
We did, and one group absolutely nailed my guard infantry onto the spot because they shot didn't do many wounds, but they slowed them so they just never got into contact. I think the other ones died a bit of a gruesome death trying to hold something up. I seem to remember.
They did at some point. They had to charge somewhat sacrificially, but equally they got into a position where they were a bit isolated because of and if they had been more conventional shooting cavalry, I'd just be thinking, it's all right if they're charged, they'll just skirmish or run away and be able to get out, but they can't. So I think from my point of view, my experience is you certainly in that Sheehan B army, the rest of the armies is horse archers or cataphracts or lancers. You have to think a bit more about where they're going to be deployed, because obviously that combination of tribal and no runaway and skirmish, they're fairly committed to where you go, where you put them. I've also previously used the Middle Sassanid Cataphract shower shooters, which are fantastic if you're fighting against a nomad horse archer army. They're brilliant. But I've generally found in more all-round use, if they're not superior, they're a bit vulnerable. The superior seems to make a lot of difference. I don't know if either of you have ever used shower shooting types.
I've never had the inclination, and I've always thought they were a bit weak. But when I played you, I found they actually stalled out the centre of my line for quite a bit. So I was.
Yeah, it's possible they're one of those troop types. It's sort of a semi-mobile shooting terrain piece. They sort of get in the way. Richard, have you ever used them?
I've used them in test games. I can't remember ever using them in a competition, but I may have done once.
Yeah.
Not sure, to be honest.
Yeah. The Sassanid ones are more flexible. They're formed, not tried, which does help, because obviously your wheels are cheaper, double moves are more flexible, and that sort of thing. So, but obviously they're more expensive because they're fully armored horse. So you pay quite a lot for them. I'd probably agree with what Richard said when he was giving a little introduction on this. They're possibly not quite worth the money in points.
Less superior. I think the superior.
Actually, yes, the superior ones are much closer, oddly, than the average one. They're like the ones in the former Yan. I would never consider downgrading them to average. Just wouldn't take them. But the Sassanid ones, where you can have them average, fully armored horse, experienced bow shower shooters, they're okay, but you don't want too many of them. So they're tricksy. They're very tricky to use. And they're definitely troops that you want to be charged, unless you're chasing down unprotected horse, in which case that can just get very funny. So yeah, I think it's a capability. I think we, as Richard has hinted at, there we probably ought to look to whether there's other troops. And I'd probably, possibly the Mamluks, the later end Mamluk type cavalry, get more like that, less fluid, perhaps. The earlier ones. Sorry, Matt.
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to talk over you. I was just like, I wonder if some of the medieval crossbowmen mounted units also might be, because they were tending to fire by the volley. They certainly were in the Eastern European side at one point. They were, so I don't know if that fits better.
Outside my knowledge, really, but I've mainly maybe because I've come at it from a Sassanid point of view. I've also tended to equate shower shooting with fairly rapid shooting. Not necessarily volleys per se, or rapid volleys, and crossbows tend not to do things rapidly.
This is true. I mean, the Polish examples, they fired by they call it arcade in Poland, which I think is a slightly different term in the Western side, but where a bit like the foot, they actually rotate round.
Yeah.
Front rank fires, falls back, front rank. How you do that on a horse, I don't know, but allegedly they did. It strikes me as a recipe for chaos. But
what could possibly go wrong?
Yes, exactly. You just sit there and go, really? But anyway,
it's a bit like the early modern caracole, isn't it? How that actually works seems a little bit vague.
Yes, yeah. It's in the manuals, but I do wonder if the manual was written more of a wish and a prayer than a actuality of trying it.
Yeah, and these terms sometimes change meaning over time as well. Yeah. But I think it's it can be good fun when you shoot at somebody and you can actually just grind them to a halt. I think I did that against Pete Entwistle at Ribble, actually. I think
you did it against me. You stopped my guys twice completely. They charged, didn't actually move. I think one moved one base width, and the other one just stood there and went, okay, I'm just going to stand there and looks good.
I think the slight problem is if you grind somebody to a total halt, it probably means you've just rolled S's. So you actually haven't done any damage to them.
Yes.
But depending how the game's going, it could be, because I seem to remember in our game it was actually quite useful.
It was, yeah. It stalled me from putting pressure on one side of your center.
Yeah. So I think they're interesting. They're interesting, is what I would say. Whether a whole army of them, I used the Sassanids at one competition with the shower shooting types, and haven't used them again. I've gone back to the more standard approach. Maybe that tells you something. But it's interesting. It's what is one for other people who've used it. Might be interesting to hear what their experiences are. So if anybody would like to comment at some point, please feel free. Or if you think it should work in a different way, well, you are free to make a suggestion.
Absolutely.
Oh, Richard didn't wince when I said that.
I've gone beyond caring.
Okay, Kitty's interested to keep things moving on, so we don't. It's actually sort of a bit. Again, another one you've participated in, Matt. I think over these competitions had recently, we've had more than the usual number of fanatics have turned up.
Yes, between me and Keith.
Exactly, you've used them with a Rajput ally in an Indian army, and Keith has used a Rajput army, which has got them. At campaign, Pete Bettany used a Muromachi peasant uprising army. I think that's the first time that's ever been used. It had a Sohai warrior monk ally, which had a fanatic unit in it as well. And I'm not sure if there wasn't another one somewhere.
Yes, because Keith used it twice.
Oh, he used his Rajput in 2 competitions, didn't that was it?
Yeah, he used it at campaign as well, I think.
Yes, he did. Campaign and because I was in the same pool as him in campaign and just didn't want to face him.
Simon's used Sohei, I think it was Sohei monks in a foot sloggers competition last year.
Yeah.
Or was that the Ikoiki? Mind you, the Ikoiki can have a Sohai ally, and I think you can end up with an army with 5 fanatic units.
Yeah.
If you do that.
Ian's used it as well. Ian's used his so
Tweak the
high.
lists to.
Sorry,
Rich.
you're cracking
Yeah, I
up a
was
bit.
just
Richard.
saying. I think you can't any longer because I tweaked the list so you
Oh,
can't
right. Yeah.
have quite as many fanatics as the version that Simon Pitt did.
Oh, right. Yeah. And I just thinking in this little segment on unusual troops, I think it's just felt a while since we've seen fanatics, or at least
Yes,
certainly not like more than one army in a competition sort of things. I mean, obviously they can be incredibly useful. I mean, I've used them a couple of years ago. Because they're a right bugger, because you've got to kill them all.
Yeah. So for those that haven't used them, fanatics basically means yes, as Nick's just said, you have to kill them all. They don't, as long as, all right, there's a slight exception in one of the lists, but usually you have to be led by a general. General doesn't have to fight unless the list says he has to fight, because I think there is one out there, isn't there, where the general must fight. I can't remember which one it is. I'll have to go find that later. But
might that be Spartacus?
Oh, yes,
could be.
Yeah. Could be. Yeah. So basically, if the unit is led by a general, every single one has to die, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Now,
and there's some lists which say fanatics have to be accompanied by the general, and there's some where you don't have to include a general, but unless it says otherwise, if you don't include a general, they just break as normal, don't they?
Yeah, because First Crusade and I think People's Crusade don't have to have them led by generals, and they count their fanatic characteristic.
Yeah.
And
equally, if you are fanatics and have fallen below the normal break point for the unit, and the general leaves, you then break.
Yes, you break immediately, which is interesting. You might as well stand and die with your troops, basically, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
But that was the purpose of that rule, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Working as intended.
Yes, so I really enjoyed them at Ribble. I found them quite a not a game winner, but they certainly mangle up an enemy flank or a unit or two, because once they're in combat, particularly the Rajputs, where they're superior charging lance and melee experts. So, they've got good base factors in melee, led by a general, so they're usually buying back wounds. Trying to kill them all off is quite painful. Although me and Keith managed it by putting both our fanatics into each other and just left them to it. And see who cut their way through the other first.
Yeah, it is. I mean, campaign I played the Muromachi Peasant Uprising, and I fought the Sohai fanatic unit. It charged one of my units, and then I charged it in the rear, and that's a superior unit and melee expert as well. Yeah, good grief! I mean, the game finished before we could resolve it, but I was pretty sure it was going to kill both my units, even though I charged it in the rear at one point.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I mean, things like the First Crusade, where they're poor and unprotected, they die to missile fire, so you never actually have to get involved with them other than to the coup de grace. But yeah, they're definitely an interesting troop type. Has anybody actually fielded the Teutonic Knight fanatic unit? I'm sure Mr. Stead must have done it at some point.
I've faced them, certainly.
I've used a Crusader fanatic unit, the 4 Templar Knights in 7th Crusade Army at Skulls a couple of years ago. They're really nasty. And their high point was, in fact, charging a Swiss pike Kyle in the rear.
Brilliant.
That was immensely good fun. I'm not sure if actually something like the later Crusader have 2 units of them. If it takes 2 military order subgenerals.
Yes, it can.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking. I mean, they're
must be what,
stupid amount of points. 1,200 and odd points for 4 bases.
It'll be a very small army.
Oh yeah. It's but they are incredibly tough.
Yeah.
There's one thing I would say about these units. So we might have mentioned it previously, but I do remember talking to Keith about it before he used them. There is almost an instinctive tendency to go, they're fanatics. If I don't fight with the general, I might as well throw a mediocre general with them. But I found, I did do that in once, and actually I found that wasn't that good, because actually being able to throw the general in is really, really useful. So in the end, I went with in my Seventh Crusade one, putting them with a talented general.
I used the talented for the Rajput, but mostly so I could control the other troops. So he doesn't necessarily fight unless I absolutely need to, but he's got 4 cards that he can muck around with.
Yeah.
And I found it incredibly useful.
And you're more likely to have even if he's not fighting, you've got that much better chance of having cards to buy off wounds.
Yeah.
Because if you get down to 1 base, they're actually really hard to kill, especially if like the superior fully armored.
Well,
because even if somebody's got something fighting you and 2 supporting files, unless they're really good troops, they're going to be rolling a white and 2 blacks, and to get 2 wounds to kill you off in the end could take an awful long time.
Keith won the Fanatic Award at Ribble when he charged his single base already carrying a wound with the general into an elephant and broke it for his enemies, for the opponent's army. So I couldn't top that one. So.
Yes, that was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I do have a feeling though that
that has Lords of the Rings flavour about it.
It was hear him charging Mama Kill, definitely. We're back to Lords of the Rings. We had Isengard earlier, and now we've got the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
But it was only 1. It only counted as 1.
Yeah, it's so. I was just going to say, I do think one of the big uses of fanatics, though, and I think you sort of alluded to it, Matt, is they just bung up a whole area, either by their presence, going, "Are you going to fight me? Are you not? Have you got anything tough enough to fight me?" And if it's tough enough, it's going to take many rounds because you've got to kill me all. Yeah. They're not necessarily the big punch that will win you the game, except if you're on one wound on 1 base and you want to charge elephants with cavalry.
Exactly. Million to 1 shot.
It's just that they're sort of the lead ball on the rubber sheet thing, aren't they? They distort the world around them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They're absolutely genius for just, you can put them single rank 4 wide and just get in the way of everything that's into their front. So yeah, I'd agree with that. But
yeah, I use them more conventionally as Soldori in a Gallic army with Spanish allies, and it just boosted the attack potential of that part of the Gallic line.
I think, but perhaps that's because that's quite a big, wide army of chargy stuff anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
Matt's army at Ribble wasn't that wide, but if you plonk to the Rajput fanatics on one end, they sort of dominated an end. Yeah, because again, the Muromachi peasant army with the Sohai monks, the Sohai monks piled in. They're a cutting edge. There's something in a huge sea of absolute dross. One of the few things that's going to kill the enemy quickly, possibly, rather than hope to white or black dice him to death. So I can see that being different. Yeah, certainly in that respect. I was just wondering why they suddenly become popular again, because I really can't remember seeing any for quite a long time, and then
yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's just
is it just one of those things?
Yeah, things tend to go in cycles a bit, don't they?
Yeah, it's nothing's particularly changed about them. Well, nice to see the option being used. So yeah.
Well, as we've just been discussing, Keith, shall we talk about Tibetan cataphracts?
Go on. I think I've got 2 cataphract things on my list to talk about. We'll start with the Tibetan ones, because the other one I just wanted to mention was cataphract camels in Parthian armies.
Yes.
This is unusual. Yeah, go on then. Kick off with the Tibetan dismountables.
Yeah. No, they're not an unusual troop type, other than the fact that they're cataphracts that can dismount. I mean, all cataphracts can dismount if you get them close enough to war wagons or fortified barricades, but they're an interesting choice because they're an ally for the Rajput Indians. I think one of the Arab states is allowed a Tibetan ally as well, aren't they?
The later Umayyad early Abbasid list can have that, and Northern Tang Chinese, I think, can have them, and I think Nanzhao can have them as well.
They get everywhere, bless them. Well, they are central to Central Asia, so
yeah.
So interesting unit basically because you used to be within the actually pay to dismount them. As an ally, you can't, so you have to take them as full-blown Catafract, and they dismount.
Oh, sorry, yes. In one of the Tibetan lists, there's a line where you can buy them as dismounted, so they're close formation, fully armored, long spear.
Yeah, which used to apply to the Rajput ally, but doesn't now. Which I think, which is a fairly logical change to make, to be perfectly honest. But sorry, as I interrupted Nick, so they dismount as fully armored, long spear, integral shooters, average. So and they are fully armored, long spear Catafracts when mounted. So dual role, basically, extremely dangerous mounted and extremely annoying to get through dismounted. Very expensive, but well worth them.
Not stupidly, because they're average.
Yeah, average.
At least the ones Keith took were all average, and they're just over 900 points a unit for 6 bases.
Yeah, not as expensive as I thought they were. So so 3,000 points for three mounted blocks of 6, which I think is what Keith was using.
Yes, the ally was 3 6s.
Yeah. So
and he led them by a talented general as well.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Given
they
how
are
important they are.
Yeah. Yes. They have that interesting quirk that you could quite confidently think you can beat up Catafracts, and then you get really close, and then they dismount, and then you're now looking at fully armored long spear integral shooters, and then suddenly the world changes.
I would point out that elephants will stomp them either way.
They will,
because they're formed close.
Yes,
on foot,
and they don't care.
Mind you, they get the integral shooter.
Well, that's still 2,
they're
and
still
I'm
relatively relatively better off on foot than they are on horseback.
Yeah, it's only a green-white to the elephant on impact at that point. But it gets worse in the melee phase. But to be fair, I backed off.
To an elephant, they're just canned goods, basically.
Stomp. With free toothpicks.
Yes.
So interesting in the sense that it's fairly unique troop type. You don't see it very often in other armies, and has its moments. I will admit I backed off against Keith, but I only had a block of 4 elephants facing them, and I thought the black dice would get me before I got him. So I was overly cautious, perhaps, because he was surprised that I hadn't got in.
I would say one thing: when they're dismounted, because they're in 6s, they can be a bit vulnerable.
That's a fair comment.
In that, obviously, things like their armor won't count until the melee phase. So, a charge phase that goes a bit against them, if it takes a second rank base off, if you're in too deep, you lose the long spear factor. So they might not be quite as good as some people think they are because of that. Or you go 2x3, but then you're really narrowing the frontage, so more easily avoidable or taken out the game. But I'm not saying they're bad troops. Don't get me wrong.
But they add a certain flexibility to some armies that don't have any decent heavy foot. I think. If that's the role you want them to play. Although, to be fair, Cataphracts are mostly good against anything that heavy foot are good against.
Yeah.
Short pike.
Yeah. But then again, you're not paying that much for dismountable.
No, it's only 5 points a base, I think, isn't it? Or 7, maybe?
7.
So across 18, you're only paying 100 and a bit for 3 units to have the option. That falls into the why wouldn't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Category. So they are very useful.
You've used Tibetans with a Tang, haven't you, Richard? I've a feeling you've used it against me many moons ago, but I did not come well off, I think. That's probably why I remember it and you don't.
I'd possibly be wary of using it within a Tang army.
It'd be quite expensive. for the
It just again, you say call it 3,000 points, three and a bit thousand points with the general, assuming you're going to make him talented because you want that because you need them to get as guaranteed as you can to play. I'm just not sure that it wouldn't take too much out of the Tang bit of a Tang army and leave that a bit iffy. Not terrible, but I just wonder if it would just upset the balance.
Yeah, I would need to be convinced. I must admit, I don't remember using Tang with Tibetan allies. So if I did, it obviously wasn't a huge success.
I wonder if that might be one where you can get an army that looks balanced if you take 2 units of Tibetan Catafracts, but you probably really need 3 for them to be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think it works as a 3, but 2, unless you're supporting it with a internal Catafracts or something similar.
Yeah. I mean, it does depend what you have round them. But I just wonder if it might just upset the balance of the army. Might be one to look at. I can do Tang, especially as I've just done myself some archers to go with replace the crossbowmen that I use for the later Zhu early Northern Song. So I can do, because the Tang have bows, not crossbows. So yeah, I mean they're really useful troops, and I thought they obviously I think work very well in that Rajput army, because Keith had a couple of units of elephants. The Rajput bit had a unit of the 4 bases of fanatics, 2 6s of charging lancer melee expert, and some rubbish infantry to sit at the back. It not necessarily wide, but pretty tough.
Yeah, it took some beating from me, I have to admit.
Yeah, well, I said a campaign, it's one I didn't want to fight. Although, quite frankly, my performance at campaign wasn't great, so fighting anything was probably not a good idea for me that weekend. I said the only game I won was I took apart Paul Cummins's Southern Dynasty's chain for the 2nd time this year. Yay! Quite brutally, actually. But yeah, so okay, so they're good. I mentioned Cataphract camels.
Yes,
I think we're going to pass this one to Richard.
Go on, 217.
217 CE Parthian army, because there were 2 Parthians at the campaign, and I think both of them had Cataphract camels. Stephen Stead used an army with a single unit, 6 bases. Adrian Pitfield had a very Cataphract heavy Parthian army with a Parthian vassal state ally, which would have presumably been Hatra, had 2 4-base units of the Cataphract camels, one in the main army and one in the ally. So
yeah, put them in some brush and watch your opponent crumble.
Yeah, I mean, just so they don't know, the Cataphract camels are tribal close, average armored horse, fully armored, short spear, a camelry like that. So 102 points a base.
I'd buy them.
As I say, if you can put them in some brush, you're laughing, aren't you? Camels treat good going.
Yeah.
So any heavy foot or anything are suddenly bad disadvantage.
Loose order foot would count as being in the open? That's a question rather than a statement.
Oh no, the camels count brush as good going, so they get for fighting loose. The one thing that struck me is it's in the context of the Parthian army, downside it being tribal, but it's a cheap unit to bully anything with a bow.
Yes, that's true.
It's 600 points and it's armored horse, fully armored.
Yeah, unless the bow are up a mountain or something, it's not going to be a great match.
It's
and they're short spear, aren't they? So you can even go 4 wide or 6
wide. Four with 2 in the 2nd rank would be perfectly viable. And especially if you can get up close to the, say, horse archers and force them to run away instead of skirmishing. and probably worth a punt at bog standard archers in the open, because you're going to be short spear, they're loose, you're up 2 in the charge, and then you're fully armored, probably against no claims in the ongoing melee.
Yes, for 102 points each, that's hardly not going to leave that at home, are you?
I'm a bit less convinced about Adrian's 2 4-base units. On the other hand, he did quite well over the weekend, if I remember rightly. So probably, and almost certainly did better than me. So well, who am I to criticise?
That falls into my elephant comment of fours are just, you wouldn't do it with 4 cavalry. So, why would you do it with 4 camels, even fully armoured? I think right circumstances, they'll be fine. But most of the time, you won't get the right circumstances, I would think.
Given their tribal, that seems an odd choice to me. But there you go.
I presume he did it, presumably, to have 2 units. Also, it was in the pool that was billed as horse lords, where armies could only have the minimum number of infantry. And I don't think they could take optional. Well, obviously, that would have to be compulsory infantry. So I suppose there's a bit of a thinking, there's quite a lot of mounted out there. I'm going to be cavalry and short spear and as well. So sort of, again, cheap, not quite as good cataphracts, having 2 units, so you got them in 2 places as a sort of mitigation against the fact they're tribal. I can see why you might do it.
But I'm with Richard. They make great anti-terrain troops.
Yeah.
If you can get the brush down. If you want a bit of terrain as well, they good support for your own terrain troops.
And I think the one is to put brush, not soft sand.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think some people probably forget brush counts as good going for camels. Sand is obvious. Of course, camels treat it as good.
and you only get sand in deserts, don't you?
Probably.
Yes.
Unless unless you can get it in coastal.
No,
sand dunes by.
No. That you're thinking about the terrain ideas I've had.
Oh yes. So yes, you want to correct that obvious omission. No rivers have sand dunes by them. No seas have sand dunes by them. Apparently,
allegedly.
At the moment.
Well, that's all right. China doesn't have a river.
China sometimes has a river, depending which Chinese list you've got.
It's complicated.
Yes.
Chinese armies in the same part of China may or may not have the same river. Some people just mislay the Yellow River.
Its course changed over the years.
Yes, I'm sure there was one here earlier.
Yes, I'm sure there was a mile-wide river here last year. Actually, joking aside, the Yellow River has changed course by that sort of margin or more.
Its mouth change is 50 miles or something.
There's a
course of its mouth changed.
There's a peninsula. It swapped from like the north side to the south side, or the other way around at some point, virtually overnight, didn't it? More than once in history.
Well, presumably after some heavy flooding. But
So yes, the Yellow River is one you can say, oh well, yes, it moved overnight. So. That's it. Okay, I suspect we might have reached the end of this, unless anybody's got anything else from recent competitions that caught their eye. I mean, maybe Richard especially, who didn't play at any of these competitions, but may have cast an interested eye over the army lists. If there's any that you think, that was an oddity, or that was unusual, or that was a brilliant choice, which rules my armies out of it.
I think you've mentioned the ones I was sort of looking at, so I'm afraid I don't really have any more to add.
Matt, any more on this before we probably pass over to you for the Kickstarters?
Only a general comment. I found all the competitions I played in this year have had an extreme variety of armies. There's been very few duplicates and some very interesting choices that made for some great games.
I think we have. I think we have, and I think the past year or so we've had some really good theme choices that have encouraged that.
Yeah. Agree with that.
Which well done us.
Yeah, on the back for everybody all around.
Yes, cake and medals for everybody. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, no, I think there have been some really good varieties of armies, as you say, and not too many duplicates, which is always good. Anyway, as I say, enough of that. I think if we move on to the bit as you suggested, Matt, maybe you would like to just tell everybody about any Kickstarters or related things, presumably relating to 3D printing, or maybe other stuff as well that you've seen recently.
There's only two, but on wildly different sides of the spectrum. Basically, there's for those that have followed Uppsala Miniatures, you'll find them on Facebook and on My Mini Factory. He's recently done a Kickstarter for Warfare in the Sumerian Empire, which covered a vast array of figure types. So 900 separate files, I think, in the end, which finished back in February.
It was 900 and something, wasn't it?
Yes, it was quite huge. A lot of similar themes within those figures, but different tunics, style of dress, shield types, all that kind of thing. But exceptional value for anybody who picked it up in the Kickstarter. It was, I hesitate to say, remarkably cheap for what he offered it for. He has. Sorry,
I would think I would categorize it as stupidly cheap. It was sort of embarrassing because I got it all. It was almost embarrassingly cheap actually for what you got out of it, and they're really nice figures.
Yeah, because we printed some off, haven't we? And they came out really well. So
Very well.
The reason I mentioned the backstory to this is he's just released mercenary Italian war figures, basically. He has sensibly decided to do them in series. So part one is the infantry, 28 mil, but they will reduce down to 15 if they're anything like his Sumerians. So it's currently it's a €45 for the early bird for those that follow Kickstarter if you do it within a week or however many days to say. So it's various Italian war infantry. If you're interested in it, great, back it. I'll heartily recommend the quality of his stuff. But I also mention it because you can also pick up the entirety of the Sumerian Empire Kickstarter as an add-on for £85, which even at £85 is a bargain for what you get, quite frankly. So if you're interested in that, look him up on Kickstarter. He uses with me, I've just managed to change the page. If you search for Uppsala Miniatures, you will find it. It was also under his own name, which is Marco Moyth.
Yes.
Yeah. This set currently contains soldiers, crossbowmen, what will contain, soldiers, crossbowmen, knights, mercenary footmen, and I suspect various add-ons of sorted descriptions. So he seems to quite like his add-ons. They look very good. That's the figure-wise one.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, from what I saw, because I backed this one as well. They look good for 15th century and into the Italian wars.
Yes, sorry, he does say that at the beginning. Yes, you're quite right.
Yeah, I think they look just like Italian depictions. Basically, I think they could be really, really good, really good.
Yeah, and if it's anything like his Sumerians, they will be somewhat modular in that shields can be changed, arms can be altered. For anybody who's daunted by that, I would say that 3D printing allows you to actually position all the arms where you want them and basically merge them into the figure. So you just then print the single figure. You don't have to print the arms separately and glue them all on afterwards, and the heads and all that kind of thing. So very simple to do. I can do it. So so genuinely, it's quite easy to do. You can do a whole lot of more complex things in Blender or 3D printing software, but actually within just the printer side of the software, it allows you to do some quite simple manipulations and combining of things. So not hard to do at all. I can do it. So that's that one. The other one I'm calling out is well, I hesitate to call it terrain, but I guess that's the closest thing you're gonna. There's a creator on there called Ayar Sun. Not quite sure where they're based, but they do terrain sets. So the one that's on there at the moment is called The Fall of the Maya Empire, and it is basically a Mayan city. So temples, barracks, walls, the works. Significant number of pieces. I forget what they said the total was, but well worth looking, simply because, again, they also give you access to back their previous Kickstarters as add-ons to the to backing their current one. So they do Ancient City of the Great Pharaohs, Ancient City of the Great Pharaohs 2, Ruins of the Ancients, Revival of the Maya Empire, Alexandria, the City of Glory, Alexandria, the City of Glory 2, Troy, the Legendary War, which I have. They are technically for FDM printers, which are not resin printers. They're the extruded plastic versions. So you can print quite well. I have had absolutely no problems printing their stuff off on a resin printer. The small base plates make it slightly more complicated, but depending on the scale you're going for. If you want to do 28mm, I'd recommend finding somebody with an FDM printer. But if you want to do them in 15mm, a lot of them will fit on a 15mm plate. I use a Mars 4, which will do it just. If you've got a Saturn 4, you'll definitely be able to do most of them. Remarkably cheap. Each set's £26 to add on optional add-ons. I think the original is the actual full Kickstarter is $25. Sorry, it mixes the active Kickstarter is in dollars for me for some reason. The add-ons are in pounds. Don't ask. Don't know. Kickstarter, I think, rather than anything special on my settings.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it. Blimey.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying. Yeah, it is a city.
Yes, the Troy one is particularly spectacular in that it allows you to build the Greek camp, and it's got whatever their version. It's not a trireme, whatever their current version of the ship was at the time, but they've got the tents built around them and things like that. Exceptionally well done. So if you're into your train pieces or you want to do skirmish games, I recommend that one. As I say, they deliver on time. Not had any problems with them. They're extremely open to messaging because typically my Kickstarter uses an email version that is different from my mini logon, my mini factory. So by default, they send it to your Kickstarter email, but dropped them a message, they sorted it. So
they do.
Yeah, those are my two call outs for this month.
They do 3 different haunted mansions.
Oh, I haven't even delved into their back catalogue. This is just the stuff that's.
So I just decided. Yes, yeah, I think yeah. It does look very, very good if you like that sort of thing. Yeah, and the prices you just mentioned, that's nothing.
No, it really isn't. And for what you get, I mean, they're extremely talented, and I mean, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we've commented before. At the moment, like we said about that Uppsala one and on the Sumerian one being just ridiculously cheap, really. I think a lot of these people are not charging what this stuff's worth.
No, the market is finding its feet at the moment. At the moment, I think people are concerned that they've put too much on. It won't. I mean, Resin Warfare, which was the one that finished last month, and that was I've forgotten who it was now. God, I bought it and everything.
It was sort of Punic War type things. Yes. It got some epirots. It was sort of mid-Republican Romanish, wasn't it?
Yeah. It covered the spectrum from Libyans, Numidians, the Spanish, Romans, a whole massive set. And I think if you bought everything, it was about €200. I did because I couldn't resist, but
I resisted that one.
Yeah, but I think having what was in it, €200 was still very cheap, considering I'd spend that on 3/4 of a metal army, and I probably have enough in there to do. What I want to use it for is easily covered by what I would have spent on the metal army for the equivalent. So I haven't lost any money. But that one I think is fairly. He placed that at a good price point.
Yes.
For what he was offering, and I think that's what we will eventually see. The Kickstarter prices start going up. So if you're interested in those kind of things, get in early if they appear.
Yeah. But did you say the Resin Warfare? You didn't have to buy the whole thing. You could buy, say, the Carthaginians or the Libyans, or if you just wanted part of it. But obviously, you got basically a discount if you bought everything.
Yeah, I think it was 10 complete sets, so you got quite a substantial discount on by buying it all together, because all wargamers love a bargain, even if we never use them.
Indeed.
Well, that's it. So look them up if you're that way inclined.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Matt. I think we're sort of coming to the end of what we'll be talking about. Once again, we've been going for quite a while and time's flown by. I don't know whether to put that down to I'm enjoying it or senility or who knows. Anyway, is there anything you wish to impart to the listener, Richard, before we wrap up?
No, I'm quite happy to say thank you for listening and hopefully join us again soon.
Yeah, I'll just mention, as we haven't done this for a while, I don't think, some upcoming competitions. There's one at the end of this month, 31st of May, 1st of June in Ireland. Not sure if it might be too late to enter that one, but details are up on the forum. It's run by Tommy Warden, running. And then mid-June, 14th, 15th of June at Battlefield Hobbies in Daventry. Competition based on Persian armies and their enemies. Thus spake Zarathustra. And at the end of June, 28th, 29th of June in Geneva in Switzerland, there's an open competition. It's being held in a hotel in Geneva, and your entry will include rooms and food. You have to work your way to fly there, but once you get there, you'll be picked up from the airport, whisked to the hotel for a weekend's gaming and socializing. I'm definitely going to that one. I've paid my money. Richard, are you going to that one?
I am indeed. I wouldn't miss it. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it looks a good one. I'm also doing the Thus Spake Zarathustra one, which I suppose I have to as I'm running it. It's a bit embarrassing if you don't turn up to your own competition. Matt,
I am at Thus Spoke. Geneva is dubious, but I'm hoping that some work issues will resolve themselves and maybe I can blag a last minute entry.
Yeah, Roger Pitfield, who's organising it, says there are still spaces. I'm not sure what sort of limitations there are on spaces, but I understand there's still room. So if anybody wants to have a weekend in Geneva, pushing toy soldiers around, there you go. That's for you. So those are the next few upcoming in the next month or so. I've got nothing else to say. So,
I'd just like to thank Richard for the historical input of the evening, as usual, which was once again interesting.
Yeah, no, that's
nice conversation.
Yeah, no, it's expanded my thoughts on rivers.
Excellent.
As I say, especially the bit I hadn't really thought about. Sort of one of those obvious in retrospect, but wasn't so obvious that I'd thought about it before. About population density must be closer to water, drinkable water. Yes. Sometimes you think, how did I miss that? Anyway, thank you. Okay, so thank you to Richard and Matt for joining me on this and probably providing the more intelligent parts of this podcast. Thank you to anybody who's listening out there. If you've got any suggestions about what you might like us to do on a future podcast or any thoughts about what we've been saying, please feel free to get in touch, post up on the forum or the social media, those sort of things. And hopefully we'll see you all again at some stage in the future.